Hey, it's me, Destiny Brand, founder of It's Destiny Sales Recruiting, and hopefully your recruiter. I wanted to talk a little bit about answering the Tell Me About Yourself pitch as someone who has had the pleasure of learning and working with so many great salespeople. It is always surprising to me how some of my best sales candidates can uncover parts about the company or the product positioning or the people who work there or contribute funding to the company that even me, throughout my own discovery process with my own clients, are unable to uncover. I don't think that there's a perfect template or format for when you bring this up and how you sell what you do know. So I'm going to speak in some generics. I do think one of the more important things is a company is not going to necessarily say, well, what do you know about our company? They're instead probably going to give you an opportunity to ask good questions that help you determine what you know about the company, and by extension, them to determine what you do know. So one of the things that I'll have candidates kind of bring up potentially is, if you've done a lot of research, sell that. But sometimes a lot of research ends up going nowhere, not only in the recruiting life cycle, but in the sales cycle. So you can say, hey, I've listened to almost all of your podcast. I am going to send my post-interview follow-up, episode number 7, and kind of my main takeaway and how I think it applies to selling into the C-suite, or the experience I have selling into a very similar type of vertical or ICP. I also think that it's important, when you have done a lot of research, or maybe not necessarily important, but to talk about, maybe the debate around research, right? How much research is too much? What does personalization mean in 2025? How do those things stay the same or differentiate depending on the buyer, the stages of the company? So saying like, hey, Destiny, I did a bunch of research here. I went as far as to listening to every single podcast. One nuance that I'm sure people don't talk about that I saw on your Pinterest page is X, and that's really interesting because of why. But all good salespeople do have a good balance between in-depth research that converts, but not using research as an excuse to not pick up the phone and start, a good conversation. I think the other thing that, kind of makes up for a good tell me about yourself conversation is, at what point are you bringing this up? I typically, when a candidate, if we make like a list of 6 or 7 different problems or case studies that the company solves, will have that kind of be more of a dialogue. So saying like, hey, founder, these are like the 6 kind of use cases or problems that I was able to see based on my research. Are you able to give me additional examples? And so you're kind of inviting them more into that, where you're learning more through getting them to add to your essential list. I do like to kind of talk out loud and, say, oh, well, I think that'd be really interesting to include in, a second touch where we're, referencing this, or I think that I would apply that use case in this part of the discovery when I'm doing this needs analysis with this buyer. So kind of not just taking this info from them, but it's showing what you do know, getting info back, and then relating of how you would apply that into the actual sales cycle. The third thing is try to get as many examples from them as possible. Can you tell me about a time? Can you give me an example when you're talking to CEOs about the value of this tool? Does this objection come up? Or, is there kind of a rhyme or reason of how you uncover the layers of what we do and the value we bring to that market? And then giving them relative examples, not only in the call, but as an agenda or post-interview follow-up. So you can say, I did give you 6 examples of how I've sold into CFOs and other Series B business transformation tools based on the 2 kind of use cases or examples that you've given me. I want to go through kind of my examples or stories and build out 2 more. Are there any case studies or examples that you're working on currently that maybe you can send me after the fact that you haven't necessarily made live? So getting them to showing your examples, giving them to give you examples, and then seeing what else is potentially on the roadmap or things that may not be public that maybe the interviewer has trusted you with enough to kind of loop you in on that by sharing with them how you're actually going to be applying that. So you could even say, I'd love to see this additional case study that you don't necessarily have built out. When I've received that as a way to prepare for the next step in the interview, I'm more than happy to give it another example of how I've sold into this industry or this market, or how I worked alongside my founder to build a case study as we were building out the go-to-market function. So ask or offer to give in order to ask, and then see how much context you're able to get that may not necessarily be out there for companies or for companies, buyers, other interviewers that may not necessarily be accessible to the public at this point. It's exciting to learn more about these companies, what they do, what's available actually out there from a product marketing perspective versus what is actually happening, kind of behind closed doors as companies are building their products. So it's a good kind of challenging point for yourself as you're preparing to put your best foot forward in an interview to see what's actually out there compared to the potential gap it is going to take when you're actually selling this product. So I do use this pitch, even if a lot of companies are not like asking you to explain what the product does. I do use this as an example, or have my candidates use this as an example of how to kind of be more proactive in their interviews, and then as more of an exercise for themselves to really see, okay, well, if the founder is telling me that we're doing all these things, but we don't really have a goal in terms of marketing or education, how far is the gap going to be? Because obviously trying to warrant a meeting with a company with very limited access of information, that can just be something that you can start kind of putting two and two together of what that gap actually is going to be and how soon are you and the founder going to be able to execute that gap. If no one's told you today, you're more than enough. Don't forget to drink your water. Cheers to you.